So, good morning and welcome to the session that, as Mike said, is getting to grips with equitable and responsible research. And we'll be introducing you to our project and the outputs from it, valuing voices. So just a quick introduction. Mike's already said who Karen and I are. So I'm Lucy Cheseldine. Karen's also on the call and will be leading some of the session. And we're the Training and Resource Development Officers. So we have been developing the principles that we'll be talking about today, the questions that help to plan and design equitable and responsible research, and the online tool and resources, all of which we'll be getting to shortly. Just a few housekeeping rules, but I don't think we need the first one because that's already done for us. We won't need the second either. But we do invite, if possible, questions in the chat at any time. There are no wrong questions or answers, and it's always nice to have a bit of engagement. So do feel free if you have a question to put it in the chat. And also we're here to learn from you. Please don't be afraid to correct our assumptions. So today we're going to explore the 5 principles for equitable and responsible research. We're going to look at some examples, and there's going to be a chance for you to do a bit of reflection and think about how they relate to your own research as well. And we're also going to demonstrate the online tool and suggest how it can support your research planning, but really crucially at this stage for you as ECRs, also thinking about how it can support your professional development, making that jump to becoming an independent researcher and moving into a research career. So just to get started and to hear a few voices out there, we have a question on the Menti, and hopefully you'll be able to access the Menti through the QR code. But the question is, what do you think the ultimate purpose of research is? It's a big question. I'll just give you a few minutes to access the Menti and just put some thoughts up there. There's no need to think about it too hard. What springs to mind? Why are you doing research? What to you is the point? And Karen's also put the Menti link in the chat, which is great. So hopefully you can access it there. So I should now be able to get the Menti up and see what's coming on the screen. There we go, fantastic. So we've got some answers coming through. To generate new knowledge, absolutely. Simplify complex topics, yes, a really good point, thinking a little bit about public engagement there as well, how we translate research for the public and to make it useful, to make a difference, to improve knowledge, find solutions to existing problems, improve things, yes, improve the community. So that kind of public sense of research being in service of making the world a better place, generate and expand knowledge. Brilliant. Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts. Absolutely, knowledge into impact, and we're going to talk a lot about that today, how we translate what we do as researchers and the knowledge that we produce into something that's useful and has impact in the world. So I'll head back to the slides. Thank you very much. So at the moment, you're all probably generating that knowledge, working away in your very specific disciplinary areas, and it can be kind of all-consuming. But of course, we all work in research in a wider context. There are lots of competing priorities in that context. There are sort of funders, there's governments who have their own priorities, there's your university that has its own strategy, there's your department that has its own direction. And you're being as an individual researcher, that's the context that you're working within. So although you're doing your own research, you're always being pulled in different directions and working within an environment. And that environment is referred to more broadly as a research culture. Like any culture, it's different in different contexts depending on who it's made up of and where it is. But there are certain things about culture, research culture. There are certain areas that I think we can all identify with across the board. And it's not just us saying this, but these areas that you can see now on the slide, you probably recognize the kind of the quantitative and qualitative research, the team versus the individual, working across the global north and global south. And these areas that apply to all of research culture are often presented as hierarchies, and they can be inequitable. So it can be that universities in the global north get more publications than those in the global south from the big publishers. It can be that your PI or your senior researchers are always the ones leading a project where you as early career scholars don't have a chance to really thrive in that environment. Certain journals are seen as more important than others. Certain disciplines are seen as more important than others. And these hierarchies are recognised now by funders as things to address, to try and break down and find ways of working more equitably. So that is where our project came in, because the Wellcome Trust ran a report on research culture and found that lots of people were not feeling like they could thrive and that these hierarchies were bringing them down. So they responded by putting some money forward, which is always very helpful. And their call was to ask, can they fund research culture activities at scale? So can they change research culture by putting some funding out there and asking the sector themselves to come up with some solutions? So we responded to this call at the University of York with our partners, Mahidol University in Thailand. And we decided that we would go out and listen to what researchers were feeling, how they were being affected in their day-to-day work, and what challenges they were coming up against. And we wanted to design some practical solutions to deal with these challenges. And we wanted to design things that really define what equitable and responsible research is, because those are big, unwieldy terms and concepts that are difficult to pin down. So we did a lot of work with our partners in Thailand and researchers in the UK to ask what would make the culture more equitable and responsible. And we've come up with 5 principles, which you can see on the screen now, and which we're going to talk a little bit more about in the session. And those are engagement and impact. As we said in the Mentee, thinking about how research makes a difference in the real world outside of the academy, outside of academia, and how it can build a better world. How teams can be more equitable and responsible, because we know that equitable and diverse, because we know and funders recognise now that a more diverse team is a happier team, is a place where people can thrive, but also improves the quality of the research itself. Risk mapping in an ever complex world, as Mike mentioned, the WUN, it's a network where researchers are working and acknowledging that we're dealing with extremely complex global challenges in research today, and that comes with higher risks. Environmental sustainability, I'm sure I don't have to persuade anyone that that is an important thing, that it's a kind of responsibility of the role model of researchers in society to lead the way with that. And reflection and learning, making sure that we're making the most of the work that we're doing. So I'll hand over to Karen now, and we're going to talk a bit more about these principles and give you some time to think about how they might relate to your own research.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. So yeah, our first principle is engagement and impact. We know from our website that this is something that the researchers are interested in. We definitely know that funders are interested in. It's one of the most visited parts of our website. So in the Valuing Voices context, engagement and impact is defined as thoughtful co-production of research, so with other people, with the stakeholders, so the people you're doing your research for, with fair attribution and ownership of research, broad engagement beyond academia, and making real world change. So really having an impact on the world and making it a better place. So what do we really mean by that? Well, first of all, tell people what you do. One of the things that researchers sometimes really struggle with is putting their own work in layman's terms, so making people outside academia and even people within academia understand what it is they're really trying to do and why. So the more you talk about it, the more you get engaged with audiences you don't usually work with, the easier it becomes to formulate that message, and it may even become, some sort of elevator pitch almost about what you're doing. We also mean by engagement and impact to gain different perspectives on your work. And you will see that when you talk to people outside your regular work environment, people will come up with all sorts of questions you may not even ever have thought about. So that's already a way to gain different perspectives. People may have opinions on what you're doing, also gaining different perspectives. So you can do that informally, just by sounding people out. But as you move deeper, and this is really what funders want to see. They want to see you working with people who you're ultimately trying to help. So, for example, in the health sciences, you may want to work with patients that have experience with the sort of topics you are working on, just to make that research better and to think. It's not like the patients will have all the answers, but together you can get a better view on what's going on and a better idea about the solutions. So what's come more and more usual in recent years, that we actually try co-production, work together to get the greatest possible impact. Outside my work for Valiant Voices, I'm also patient and public involvement manager. So, and I work for the National Institute for Health Research. And what you see there, that they've been really in the UK at the forefront of a big push to involve patients in research. We actually pay people for their time volunteering, so there's a more equal setting around the table. They ask for it in applications. They expect you to talk to patients before you write your application, so you have a good idea of what's going on. You're required to write that lay summary so that anyone can understand what your research is about. I know from talking to panel members who are academics that even they often rely on that lay summary just to understand what's going on in a field that is not quite theirs. You have to have an involvement plan, and public members are part of the funding panels. So they're really trying to integrate the two worlds together. There's different kinds of engagement. So there's just a few we've listed there. There's possibly more. We've also given the definition. So it sort of reaches from sort of going one way to two ways interaction, and there's also, when you look at involvement, there's also scales of power. How much power are you going to hand over to the patient in decision making, that kind of things. But I've really put these in these slides, these different ways of engagement, because you need to really think about, when you say engagement, what do you actually mean? Is it going to be you speaking and expecting the public to listen? Is it going to be a two-way exchange? How much say are they going to have in the decisions? all of these questions come into play when you think about engagement, and that's where the real challenge is, but that's also where the joy is. Talking to people who can really, when I talk about working with patients, they really are are coaches almost. They I work in trials that usually very long processes with their ups and downs. The patients can really will you on and really make a difference in how you execute your research. So in York, the Valiant Voices team in York, as you see in this picture, you see all of my colleagues except me because I was on jury duty when this picture was taken. But we we try to do what we say, so practice what we preach. So for engagement and impact, for example, we have tried this to take this approach and embed it in the way we work. So, for example, when we developed our tool, can I have the next slide, please? When we developed our tool, we launched an early version of this Valiant Voices tool that we will tell you more about. And we gathered as much feedback as we could from the research community. So we had feedback buttons on this version. We interviewed people about how they found working with the tool, the online tool. We talked to different kinds of researchers, for example, people working in the lab, but also other kinds of academia. So in different fields. So we tried to get a really rich idea of what people liked about the tool, what they disliked about the tool, what they thought they could improve. And we really feel that with all that input, we built a much better tool for equitable and responsible research that researchers can actually use. So one of the things, for example, was that we added a downloadable Word version for people to work in teams, around the table with parts of the tool. And so on and so forth. So, just by getting that engagement, even though it always seems a lot of work and it seems to go slow, it definitely helps research and the outcomes of research be stronger. Okay, as part of this session today, we ask you to reflect after each of the principles to we don't do that just because we want a break. We're doing this to help you build a sort of a plan of action. So we want you to come away with just a few things you can apply in your work right now that are already a Valiant Voices approach to your work. So I would like to invite you to take 2 minutes now to think about one. Do you currently think about engagement in your research, and write down one way you might want to include engagement and impact in your future research practice? So just think about this for 2 minutes, please, and then we'll move on to the next principle. Thank you.
Okay, hopefully that signaled the end, and hopefully you had a few minutes to take all of that in, but also to really think about how it applies to you, and it's not just kind of information at you. So the next principle is equity and diversity in teams. And depending on where you are in your research career at the moment, it might be that your team is you and your supervisor. It might be that you are working already as part of a team, or collaborating with industry perhaps, but you definitely will be to some extent working with peers, and thinking about that future of how you move to become not just an independent researcher, but someone who is working within a research team, and is engaging, as we've said, outside even of academia. So within this principle, we think, in terms of what we're actually doing and the policies that we're trying to influence and the practices and models that we're developing, we're thinking about fair recruitment processes, how to make sure that from the very beginning a research team is made up of a diverse members, and that there's that kind of person-centered approach where it's recognized that having a diverse team improves the working environment and the research. We're thinking about working across disciplinary boundaries, which is absolutely key again to addressing those huge challenges that researchers being asked to solve. We're thinking about EDI as really central to, again, that person-centered approach and how we make an environment in which everyone can thrive no matter what their background, and that your own personal narrative and story in the world is kind of contributes to the way that you work and what you offer that team. Professional development, a really key thing, particularly for you as ECRs, that you, even though projects are short term and may only run for a couple of years, you are still having that support for a long-term research career. I'm thinking about global equity, how we work across research teams in the global north and the global south, and how we do that equitably. So to just pull that apart a little bit, it's about thinking how you be collaborative and inclusive in your own working methods, and also how you fit into an environment that fosters that kind of approach. Because as we all know, academia and research is a very competitive environment. It can be extremely individually focused, and it's about thinking how you move beyond that and become a collaborative team member, and the research is what comes first. Expect and protect support for your professional development. As I've said, that kind of precarity of the environment that you're working in, that there is a recognition that everybody should have professional development and protected time to move on and think about what you want from your career. And there's an element of knowing yourself and what you can bring to the table, being comfortable in the sense that diverse research teams, funders are looking to foster diverse research teams. They recognise across the board that this is something that is good for research. So if you can craft that distinctive professional identity, keeping track of your transferable skills, research is a much larger context. Working with groups outside of the university and with industry is so key, and thinking about what you can bring to the table across the board, and thinking about how your career is flexible as well, and making your voice heard, finding ways to make sure that what you have to offer is at the table. And that is, of course, not entirely your responsibility, but there are things we hope in the tool that will give you things to lean on and ways forward, and that the knowledge that the sector is thinking more about equity and moving in that direction. So stepping up and ensuring that you're making the most of those opportunities. So just thinking a little bit about how we have approached equity and diversity in our own team. And I know it's not just our team that have done that. There are resources on the tool of other research teams who have tried out these models, and kind of wider conversations are including them more and more. But we've tested out some non-hierarchical leader models to again to find that way of working together in which everybody can kind of speak up and bring their best self to the table. Um, so the first model we tried was challenging and didn't quite work. And as Karen said, the Living Lab is all about experimenting and being okay with failing and acknowledging that and trying again, trying something different. And all teams work differently, so it's important to have that approach. But the first leadership model that we tried was a kind of flat hierarchy where everyone was in a way in the same level, and we needed full consensus for decisions to take them forward. And as you can imagine, that in itself it comes with its own problems, because the expectations and the responsibility of team members often didn't match their role and their pay grade. We've been asked to make decisions that really were, kind of above your pay grade, and taking responsibility for that is stressful. Because everybody had to have consensus and know what everybody else was doing in order to input on decisions, we were digesting a lot of information regularly. And of course, in a research team, there is so much going on, that you don't really have time to work like that. So you have to find a more effective way of going forward. Slow decision making leading to project delays, as I've said, and no one had the final authority to move things forward. So that was slightly sticky as a model. It wasn't working, so we moved to a distributed leadership model, which is what we're working with at the moment. And this has been much better and seems to be moving things along. And we're all kind of working well together and able to reflect on how things are going transparently, which is good. So that is kind of the sense that you all take ownership for tasks that fit your skills and experience, and you are able to lead and make decisions on those tasks, but you don't hold final responsibility for them. That sits with the senior leaders in the project. So it's providing opportunities for that leadership without a formal role, without the responsibility that is kind of inequitable. And you're getting tasks and taking leadership on things that really fit and suit your skills. Only really key decisions require full team consensus, and project leadership, as I've said, holds overarching responsibility. So that's been a much more dynamic model that's been working for us, and there's information about that on the tool. If it's ever something that you want to bring to the table. And as I say, we know that other projects out there are trying these leadership models out. So just over to you for a moment of reflection. I wondered if there were any initiatives or networks or any kind of models or anything that supports equity and diversity in teams at your institution. And if you can think of any, we'd love to hear about them in the chat. There's ringing any bells, or if there's anything that you've tried or that's going on in the wider context at the moment that you're aware of to kind of tackle team dynamics. Just give you a moment. As I say, do type things in the chat if you want to share them. And if you don't know of anything, hopefully there's plenty on the tool, and hopefully what we've shared about our own experiences gives you some ideas for the ways that you can work within a team to to produce a place where everyone something to the table, and that's kind of the title of the project. Respecting people's contributions regardless of their level or field is so key, absolutely key. That everybody has knowledge, and knowledge is not just produced in the university either. There's all kinds of knowledge that are born of experience, and understanding that we all have contributions to make that is so important. Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you very much for sharing. I'll pass over to Karen now to dig into some more principles. Sorry, I will not. I will give you a couple of moments to reflect. and add to your next actions to your task list to think about how, whether you have considered equity and diversity in your current working relationships. And as I said, that may well and your peers, but also thinking about how you might apply it to your wider context, and potentially how it might develop as you move into working with research teams. And it's fantastic to see some more ideas coming through on the chat. So thank you. I'll give you a couple of minutes to have a think about that. Okay, thank you. Hopefully, you had a moment to reflect and add a few things to your actions. And just to acknowledge what's coming through on the chat in the meantime, thank you for that. It's important to have a real diversity of knowledge, and interesting to hear that the kind of gender equity is flipped in one situation. Plenty to think about there. I will now pass over to Karen to take you through some more of the principles.
Thanks, Lucy. So the third principle identified by Valuing Voices is strategic risk mapping. And so in the context of Valuing Voices, the definition is identifying potential risks, prioritizing the risks you can actually address, planning for mitigation, and monitoring throughout your project. So what we really mean by that is like basically strategic risk mapping is being really pessimistic for just a moment, asking yourself what could go wrong in my project. And if the way Valuing Voices looks at it in general is sort of like these big strategic risks, like geopolitical risk, reputational risk, compliance risks, which some of those may well apply to you, but it also looks at risk to the people working in research, because if we all know that if a colleague falls ill, for example, the work gets harder, and the pressure on finishing a project in time and with the same kind of quality becomes really difficult. So I think in the context of your early research careers, you may have a lot of worries. I definitely, for example, as for public involvement, I always worry, well, what if we can't find the people we need to talk to, for example? And um, for a long time, I worried about that. And then when I start working in this project, I thought, aha, because they may feel like personal worries, but they're actually, you could reframe them as risks to the project. So, for example, if you were to experience writer's block or even maybe isolation, that's that's not good. That's not good for you, but it's also not good for the project. So by reframing it as a risk to the project, it may be easier for you to start talking about that to your supervisors and to ask your supervisors for help or ways to mitigate. Um, it becomes something that you may possibly have more of a grip on. So when we look at uh, uh, strategic risk mapping, we think about what are the biggest risks to the success of this project and what can we do about them. I mean, there are some risks that may not be entirely avoidable. So it may not be a good idea to spend a lot of time, effort, and money on avoiding risks like that. So it's about identifying the biggest risks and allocating time, money, and effort to that risk should it occur. And it's also about how can we keep track of the risks. And we said we are a living lab, so I'll show you how we do that in our own team. So we have actually set up a document that you see here in front of you that is called the risk register. And we look at this every 3 months. And I mean, it's fairly straightforward, and it's just one way to deal with risks and risk mapping on the tool. There's other examples such as heat maps. Anyway, so the way we do it is we name the risk, we describe the risk, we categorize the risk. So as you can see, mental risks or physical risks to our team members are part of the categories, but there's, for example, also risks to the timeline or risks to the reputation of the project or indeed the university. We think about the likelihood the risk may happen. We analyze the risk and think about ways to mitigate the risk. And based on all of this, we give it a priority. And we assign the risk to one of our team members. So one of us is always sort of scanning to see if the risk, if the likelihood may change, if we should start to give it a higher priority, if we should think of different ways to mitigate. But there's always somebody on it, and I think that's key. And so every 3 months, we as a team we look at the list and adjust it if necessary. Okay. One thing I'd also like to say before we start the reflection is that by having those risks and having them as a list and looking at them from time to time, it also means that like I said before, you can share it, so the onus isn't just on you. That it's in a way, it's also enables your supervisors to look with you at what might get in your way. So again, like before, I'd like to give you some time to reflect on this. Have you previously identified and planned ways to mitigate risks in your research problem, and how could you include risk mapping in future research plans? So just think about that for a moment. Again, as I said, this reflection activity is really to come out with a list at the end of this session of things you could put in place and may really help you in your future work. Okay, time's up for this activity. We'll move on to the fourth principle, and then we'll have a little break. So the fourth principle is environmental sustainability. And when we talk about environmental sustainability in the Valuing Voices context, we're not talking about research projects that are focused on sustainability, but we're talking about having some awareness of how we can lessen our impact on the environment in any of our research processes. So that's about sustainably sourcing day-to-day resources. It's about developing environmentally friendly products, ethically sourcing hospitality and catering, and assessing and monitoring research travel. So what does that mean? It means that basically do what you can. Make small and reasonable adjustment to the daily context. Consider the digital as well as the materials. So, one of the big issues of our time right now is, of course, AI and the environmental impact that can have. So think about is AI really useful in your project, and in what ways? I mean, do you have to use it or not? It's also about how much data do you actually need to collect. All kinds of digital considerations are there, and in our tool that Lucy will demonstrate, there are resources specifically on digital impact as well. And so why should we do this? Well, it's on funders' minds. You see it in when you look at what is on their agenda. This is on their agenda, and the reason is that that as researchers we're trying to make the world a better place, and if we're not thinking about our environmental impacts, we're basically undermining that. So So that's definitely a big consideration. And of course, universities are also seen as sort of like beacons, where that sort of should set an example for others. We're supposed to be the innovators here. So and it's hard, but as we said, you yeah, we encourage everybody to do what they can. So as a living lab, our team has had a go at various things, and one of those was when we went to a conference last year. We were going to hand out the QR codes to our website, because as I mentioned before, we were trying to collect as much feedback on the beta version of our website as possible. But we didn't like the idea of handing out paper that would be probably end up in the bin maybe within half an hour or so. So we thought about how can we make this better. So we thought, oh well, we'll try to give another use to this piece of paper. We'll print our information on seed paper instead of regular paper, because seed paper, has little flower seeds in it, so you can grow flowers at home after you're done reading. So that's what we did, and to our own astonishment, this sort of little challenge, this little exercise, turned into something else completely. So we thought it was all about a reuse, giving it a second life, basically. But we also realized while we were at the conference that people considered it as a small gift. They were really taken by surprise that this wasn't ordinary paper, but it was seed paper, and they could grow their flowers. We knew it held their attention for longer, which was another benefit. We knew that because people sent us pictures of their flowers, so they remembered valuing voices for longer, which was an added benefit. And we also realized that it was a very handy illustration for our project. While we were at the conference, we could say, right, sustainability is one of our principles, and look, here's some seed paper. So it was a very nice surprise for us that something that seems to be doing the right thing actually became something of much more value to the project that we actually hadn't foreseen. And I think that's one of the great things about setting yourself challenges. So in this case, in terms of sustainability, that it can lead to new insights and better work in the end. So yeah, this I have to say, seed paper, that was sort of like a very easy gain. We also know that in our living lab, just from our conversations, it can quickly become more tricky. For example, we were organizing an event, and there were some heavy debates on whether we should go meat free, as in terms of environmental sustainability. And already, there was more discussion than about this seed paper, because some people thought, okay, we should just go meat free, and others thought, well, no, this is a personal choice. We should give people options. Then it came to travel, and it becomes even more difficult, because can you travel abroad to give workshops and still be believable when you talk to environmental sustainability? That becomes even a more difficult choice. It's also difficult. Well, we found that as university in the global north to come and send a message to universities in the global south, because that the global south is are disproportionately affected by the way of life in the global north. So it becomes really difficult quite quickly. But nonetheless, it's important to think about and important to try to make these changes because, I mean, thinking about how many universities there are in the world and how much research is done, if we all made a small change, that could have a considerable impact. So again, I want to ask you to reflect on this principle. So what are you already doing to make your work more environmentally friendly, and what else could make your work more environmentally friendly? So again, 2 minutes to think about that as part of building your action plan. Hey, before we break, I was just wondering if anybody would like to share in the chat anything that they are doing that's working for them to make their research more sustainable. That would be great. I'll just give you a minute to type that in if anybody wants to. And really, it could be anything. I mean, Zoom calls instead of travel, of course, make a huge difference already.
And there's already a good one in there about methods, resources, and outcomes. So thinking about research processes.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Yeah, outcomes minimize methods, resources, and outcomes minimize ecological impact while promoting long-term ecological balance. Yeah, that's great. Use Ecosia browser. Oh, I've never heard of the Ecosia browser, but I will check it out. That's fantastic. Thank you.
That's a really good tip. It's just a simple change, isn't it? But obviously we're all using our browsers so often, but it's something that's really it's the kind of change we're thinking about, that just little practical switch that can make a really big difference. So that's a really good tip. Thanks, David.
Right, I think we'll be ready for a 5 minute break now. It's 9:59 on my. So shall we get back here at 10:05? Is that okay? So just a quick break to spread your legs and maybe grab something to drink, and then we'll see you in 5 minutes. Okay, I hope we have all had a break to stretch our legs. Our last principle, the last of the five, is reflection and learning. So in the valuing voices context, that's about regular team reflection, although individual reflection is good as well, of course. Revisions according to learning, project evaluation, and acknowledging failure, and sharing all that you learn with the research community. So what do we mean by that? Well, you're already doing it today. You know, we're giving you time each time to think about what we've just said, and we're thinking about um, um, taking that approach forward. What you can do in the future, and that's really what reflection is all about. You may think, oh, it's just about looking back and looking at what's happened, but the important bit is actually that you translate that into future action. So here in front of you is a really basic model of reflection. There are more complicated models, but I mean they are this is the basis of it all. So you take an experience, you think about what happened, how you felt about it, and what could have what went well, what could have gone better, and based on your new insights, you take that forward. So that you know taking it forward is a really crucial part of that, and probably also the most difficult part of it. Um, so and yeah, it's not always easy to do. For example, there's often people feel they don't have time for it, or if you want to do it as a team, there's sometimes there isn't a culture for it to say, okay, let's just take a pause and think about what happened here. Teams are busy, so and sometimes there's just the quiet space to think about things, or it's just a bit hard. But what we're saying is start small. So you need to think about it as an investment in your future work. Upping the quality and maybe the efficiency of your work. So think of it as an investment and start small. Maybe take out a few minutes each day to at the end of the day. So you try to make it a habit. Try to think about how you can improve things. Think about yeah, just taking really smart steps. Maybe find somebody you can do it with together if that helps to talk things through. There are definitely ways you can incorporate that. We do it in Valuing Voices as a team experience. We take it really seriously. We come together every 3 months and work as a team through some of the things that have come up and thinking about direction we need to go. And we feel it's extremely valuable to get everybody back on the same page and to get everybody moving forward. So time for one more reflection. And as I said, it's about getting that little plan together for some small steps to take these valuing voices principles and embed them in your work. So if you could just take 2 minutes to write down one commitment towards incorporating reflection and learning in your future research practice, and then we'll move on to the next bit of this webinar.
Okay, so that's the five principles, and hopefully you've been able to, in that reflection time, put together some ideas of how you might practice them. And we're going to move on to look at the Valuing Voices tool itself. So I'll just thank you for sharing in the chat, actually, just one thought about reflection, that the stakeholders of research share knowledge. Um, and that's a really important point, and reflecting with your stakeholders is really key. So bringing the right people into the room, those that you're engaging with as part of that reflection and learning, is essential. So thanks for sharing that. Yeah, so moving forward, and I guess thinking a little bit as ECRs about how you're going to change the direction of research, right? You are the researchers of the future, and that's really exciting. But it takes some planning and some strategy. And leading the way in equitable and responsible research is what we want for you, and that's what we hope the tool offers. So I'll give you a little tour of the tool. There's a QR code on the screen now. There's also the web address. So hopefully you're able to get onto the site. But what I'll do is go through the site on the screen as well. So hopefully you've all had chance. And Karen and oh, thank you, Amira. You've put that in the chat. Fantastic. Okay, so if I can get onto the site. There we go. So this is the Valuing Voices tool. It's hopefully what you think is quite a nice looking website, and as you'll see up there, we've got the principles and some information about how the tool's been developed on the homepage. So that's a bit of background, and you can click into each of the principles and get more information on them, as I'm doing now. And lots of what's up on there is what we've talked about already, kind of definitions and delving deeper into what the principle means. But I think what's really key, and what is potentially one of the most useful parts of the tool, are the resources. And Karen and I have been through hundreds of resources, reviewing what's out there, because it can be quite overwhelming. And it's going back to that sense of, well, okay, what is equity? How can I be equitable? And really pinning down some practical strategies for how you can make that happen in a research context, in the working context that you're in. So the resources that we've curated, and there's not an overwhelming amount, we have really picked ones that we feel fit practical solutions for being more equitable and responsible in your research, and give you actual kind of actions forward to make that happen. So there's lots of resources on there. You can filter by topic, you can filter by level, you can filter by principle as well. And obviously these are the resources for equity and diversity in teams. You can click into them and it'll take you through. So the idea is that you've got a sense of what the principles are. You've thought a little bit about the ones that really interest you, speak to you, might be potentially kind of pertinent to a fellowship application that you're developing, or a funding application that you're developing. And so you've got some ideas of how to take it forward. There's then, in the tool itself, a practical planning sheet. And this is a series of 4 questions based on results-based planning that help you put together a really clear action plan for how you are going to put that principle into practice in your research project. And you can do this for a research project that you're developing now. It might be the one that you're working on, whether that's your PhD, whether that's a postdoc, that you want to reflect on how you can actually integrate these principles, or it might be something that you want to a project you want to take on in the future. And these 4 questions, as I said, are results-based planning. So you essentially start with the end in mind. You start with the outcome, what you really want to achieve, and you work backwards from there. So what is it? What is the vision of equity and diverse team, equitable and diverse teams that you want to achieve? How will you deliver that through your outcomes? And there are lots of prompt questions on the tool itself to help you think about that, because we know these are big and difficult questions. What actions do you need to deliver those outputs? So if you want to recruit a diverse team, and if you want to have a diverse team and you want to think about your recruitment process, okay, what actions within that process are you actually going to take forward to make that happen? What resources will you need? It's really, really key for funders to see that you've resourced a project properly, that it's a realistic vision of how you're actually going to make the things that you've said happen, and that's something to get to grips with, that kind of costing side of research, and thinking about what the practical inputs are. So that's the tool. You can fill that out by logging in, and it will save your answers. You can also download your answers as a Word document, a PDF. It might be that you want to collaborate. If you're joining a research team that you want to collaborate on your ideas, well, you can download that Word document and share it with others. So there's lots to explore on there. And it's not to feel overwhelmed by the planning aspect. As I say, there's lots of prompts on there to kind of spend some time with, thinking about. But we hope that the resources will really inform what that plan looks like and give you some ideas to get started with. So I'll return to the slides. And I just want to take a minute really to think about why you might use the tool and what's in it for you. So it does support effective reflection on your research practice, and practice is key. This tool is not necessarily about the outcomes and the journal articles and what comes from it. It's about how to get there, and how you get there in an equitable and responsible way, how the practices and processes of your own research are value driven. And it empowers you, in a sense, to mobilize your learnings for career development. As I said, this is a tool. We hope it will help you as researchers of the future to lead the way in this way of this equitable and responsible way of doing research. And the resources are there for you to kind of take on and think about how they relate to your own individual research context. And we hope that really from that, by developing those practices, the research itself will be more impactful, and that your outputs will be more thoughtful, that there'll be a sense of engagement and how research is translated for the public good, which really came through in that Menti at the beginning. So what we do with the knowledge that we generate and how we responsibly produce outputs that can be used to make the world a better place, and not just to instrumentally continue kind of the production of knowledge. We know, because we have done a lot of research and talking and workshopping, that the principles we've come up with fit with funder requirements. So the Responsible Research and Innovation, RRI, is what we call it in the UK, but there's a version of it everywhere, that there is a sense that this is the direction in which research is moving. And as I've said earlier, we know that researchers being asked to take on these big, complex global challenges, which means working with lots of different actors and sectors. So it's thinking how to do that. And finally, it's that sense of academic citizenship. So at the moment, when you're kind of consumed by your own work and you're working in a silo, it's thinking about, okay, well, I move out into the community, and what can I do for the research community to make it better, and take on some of that responsibility to create an inclusive research culture. And often that's, ECRs are actually pioneering and leading the way in doing that. But it's making sure that we drive that forward as an agenda collectively. So just to give you a sense of our mapping of this against the funding landscape, so there's a table there that shows you, we've kind of gone through lots of different big funders in the UK to see what they're asking for on grant applications. And as you can see, lots of the principles are there across the board. I guess really key if you're thinking about fellowship applications at this stage, You can see that the British Academy, a huge funder, Wellcome Trust, they're all looking for these principles to be part of the action plan of your research project, and the application that you put forward. So being really forward thinking in these areas is a way to develop your research career by getting that research funding. And we know that it's happening. So Oliver Craig, who is an archaeologist at the University of York, has given us a testimony. He's been part of some of our workshops and the development of the tool, and he's used the tool in one of his grant applications to the European Research Council. And this is a huge grant. It's £10 million. It's working with 34 researchers across different countries, so it's a truly global and collaborative project. And he said that he drew heavily on the tool to write a successful synergy project, and mentioned valuing voices in the interview. So again, it's having this tool and these practices to draw on is important for writing grant applications, but also for interviews and for setting up the project itself and following things through to delivery. So it's really part of the whole lifespan of how you do good research. But we do know that it's getting funding for people, which is really good to hear. And it, hopefully is encouraging in the sense that if you have an application coming up or you are really thinking about the next step, this can be something that's very useful, and it's getting more traction. So we've got a little bit of time for questions now. So please do put them in the chat if you have any, and we'd be very happy to answer them.
We have a question in the chat. Apart from acknowledging valuing voices, are there any restrictions to using the tool? I'd say no. Lucy, what's
No. I mean, it's a good question, and a question we're always asking things, thinking about intellectual property in this sphere, but absolutely not. So one of the conditions of our funding from Wellcome is that we produce a free tool that's available for anybody to use. And one of our own kind of founding principles in the project has been that we create a tool that is globally applicable. So anybody anywhere can use this tool, no matter what kind of research you're doing. These should be applicable principles, and they should be able to be taken and adopted in your own context. So there are no restrictions at all, and we would absolutely encourage you to share it widely. Thank you, Innocent.
Are there any more questions? I think otherwise we'll just move on to our last slide, Lucy. So just, to wrap things up, we've put it down some key takeaways. So we've talked about 5 principles for equitable and responsible research that we have identified to talking with researchers in different fields, in different parts of the world, and boiled it down to 5 principles because we think that's plenty to get a handle on, to get a grip on. If you apply those 5 principles, you're on the right track. We hopefully through this webinar, you've now, by reflecting every time on every principle, have a set of actions to practically implement the principles in your research by taking just really small initial steps to to get going with this approach. And we have shown the tool, Volume Voices tool, which, as Lucy said, is free for everybody to use, and we hope will be used widely. And that tool is designed to really, take those initial steps that you hopefully now will take those forward and develop your research ideas in practice in a way that is equitable and responsible, and in general just benefits everybody, without well, let's put it this way, to do this in a way that everybody can thrive, and everybody can benefit from the work that you're doing. So thank you very much for coming to our webinar, and for the questions you asked, the suggestions you made in the chat. We really appreciate your time, and hopefully you will use our tool throughout your research. Thank you.
Thank you.